In case anybody doesn't know where East Yorkshire is, it lies on the east coast of England and north of the Humber Estuary, which, as time goes on in this paper, will become of considerable importance. The sites that we'll be talking about are here on the map. These are the most of the known chariot burials up to date. One can see there are two coloured dots, ones that are dismantled and ones that are intact, and you'll find out more about that later. What I propose to do is to provide a background to the Arras culture, talk about why perhaps it flourished in this region, something of the background, the landscape background and landscape change at this time, and lead on to Paula's magnificent work, which I must say I've been so privileged, along with my colleague now at Umea University, Professor Malcolm Lilly, to be academic advisors, and so exciting to actually see those discoveries being made. We'll start then with Arras, and this is the earliest reference that I've found so far, which was made by Abraham de la Prime, who was the curate at Holy Trinity Church in Hull, and he's writing here to Dr. Gale, who's the Dean of York. And he says, I saw in my journey to York many hundreds of tumuli which I take to be Roman at a place called Arras on this side Wheaton. Not mentioning any author, which I intend next summer to dig into and take a whole account description thereof, and of all other Roman stations. Well, fortunately, perhaps for us, that never came to pass. And it was many years before any of these barrows were excavated. And this happened after the Napoleonic War for 3 years, from 1815, 1816, and finally in 1817, by an unusual group, possibly the Dr. Hull, rather confusingly, from Beverley, who is a doctor of medicine, and also Barnard Clarkson, who was a gentleman farmer, lame preacher, with some notoriety from home on Spalding Moor. And the person we've got to thank for any record of this, which is the Reverend E. Stillingfleet. And this is an extract taken from the first account that was made in 1829, so a considerable time after those discoveries, by a letter sent to Mr. Hindwell of Scarborough about the finds. I won't go into detail. This is recorded, so I'll be able to read it. And there's some very interesting points made, however. It was buried with a horse, and that, as we'll see, is very significant. Also shield boss and other artifacts. It wasn't until much later that Stillingfleet provides any detailed account, which is shown here. It appeared at a conference of the Archaeological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland, held in York, as you can see from the rather nice frontispiece there. And in it, he illustrates some of the finds. And note, at the top here, this little votive axe, little copper alloy axe that was found in the grave of the King's Barrow. And these are some of the artifacts. The top right one, this one shows the bridle bit, a nave band, turrets and linchpins of the King's Barrow Chariot. And on the left, you can see the wonderful map drawn by the famous East Yorkshire mapmaker, William Watson, who was brought in to do the mapping. And thanks to Stephen Briggs' researches in the archives at the British Museum, suddenly the finds, which in a letter W and a number, made sense. And we're able to map some of the artifacts which are in the British Museum and the Yorkshire Museum into their place. But of course, done on the 5th of August, 1816, he missed some of the most exciting burials, which is, of course, the King's Barrow. The Queen's Barrow, which is underneath, did not contain a chariot, but some very fine artifacts, including a fine brooch decorated with coral, not illustrated here, and also one of the very rare pieces of gold in the Arras culture burials. Further work was undertaken in 1850 by the Yorkshire Antiquarian Club, and then again by Canon William Greenwell in 1876. I note the way he's holding that spearhead, possibly bound for John Robert Mortimer. They were great rivals, of course, in barrow digging in East Yorkshire. But what was really nice, both in their old age, they collaborated on the excavations in the north of Eastern Yorkshire at Danes Graves. Further work then was done much later. And really, it's this man shown here clutching, I think, one of the fire dogs, perhaps from, I can't remember whether it's Baldock or one of the other ones, a very young Dr. Ian Stead, FSA. And his thesis was based on the Latin cultures of Eastern Yorkshire, which, thanks to the Yorkshire Philosophical Society, became the book, The Arras Culture. Arras was also, I think, one of the second only places in Britain to have a magnetometer survey done. And I managed to find here a picture of Professor Martin Aitken carrying out an early magnetometer survey. So the chariot burials themselves, well, I thought we couldn't escape by looking at this great gallery of the burials from Garton and Wetwang Slack, which to date is the biggest concentration. From Tony Brewster's excavation back in the 1970s, early 1970s, through to the 2001 excavation excavated by Rod Mackey for Guildhouse Consultancy. The three at Wetwang, found in the same memorable year, 1984, excavated by John Dent, photographed here by Tony Pasito, and then we have the famous Kirkburn chariot burial dug by Ian Stead, who also excavated the Garton Station one. The Kirkburn one, remember, has that magnificent sword, and you can see here the mail coat being conserved prior to its being lifted. What hasn't been done, partly due to changes in technology really, was to place these within the landscape. So for a recent book chapter, I used ArcGIS and was able to plot the Wetwang burials within their landscape. Note towards the east, the two dots there are the Garton Station and Kirkburn ones. In the center, we've got Garton Slack and three together at Wetwang Slack. And to the far west, east over here, oops. The far west, we've got the 2001 female barrow. What's interesting about these is the grave goods within the female burials are as lavish as any of the male ones, apart from not having weapons. So chariot burial distribution. Until recently, the only ones were in Eastern Yorkshire. Then we got the first real outlier at Ferry Fryston, but one can argue this is right on the boundary of the Arras culture. It does bear quite close similarities to the others, the pork bones, the burial posture. But what was different about this one was its intact nature. And then, of course, we get this other one at Edinburgh, which Fraser Hunter and Headland Archaeology were responsible for excavating, with its very early radiocarbon date, which is in fact the earliest chariot burial, and then the one from Pembrokeshire, which you can see here, which alters the distribution pattern. But note, all are fairly coastal in distribution. And then we look at the other distribution in this great controversy as to where suddenly this idea of chariot burial comes from. A matter of considerable debate, of course, ranging from missionaries bringing over the idea to perhaps migration, something that remains to be assessed. So in summary, there are 27 chariot burials in Eastern Yorkshire, 30 or so in the UK, 15 where sex is determined, 4 female, 10 male, 17 where the layout is known, 12 dismantled, 5 intact, 11 where the orientation is known, all have head to the north. Of this, above 6 face east and 1 west, 10 burials where turrets are found, all but 1 have 5 rather than 4. I think that's true, but Paula will enlighten us later. But what is fascinating is this burial of pork within the burials, usually the forequarters. 8 burials include martial items. Again, there's the great debate as to what these chariots were doing, whether they carried people around the landscape, whether they were hearses. But Greta Anthunes and perhaps myself as well would perhaps, because we've got historical evidence for that, see them used in warfare as well. What of the square barrows in which all of these chariot burials are buried? Well, the map on the left-hand side shows the distribution of square barrows up to 2013. It's quite a close distribution in Eastern Yorkshire, not just on the Wolds. There are quite a number on the Vale of York and into Holderness. But Holderness is not conducive to showing crop marks or even being very good for magnetometry. And a recent pipeline trench, which showed nothing really above the ground, revealed 2 more square barrows, and I think 1 certainly had a sword within it. There are only 2 or 3 places where one can see upstanding square barrows: at Danes Graves, at Beverley Westwood, which is not to be confused with the golf tee, because it is on the golf course there, and this one, which is the best preserved, at Scarborough, not far from Beverley. And actually some excavation was done there by Ian Stead and published. Now onto the landscape. Well, we owe an enormous debt to Cathy Sturts and the Royal Commission on Historical Monuments of England for producing this wonderful book, Ancient Landscapes of the Yorkshire Wolds, which maps the crop marks for an immense area, right from the Humber up to Flamborough Head. And again, using Cathy's crop marks, kindly supplied by then his English Heritage, I was able to superimpose those on the landscape, which gives a really better view of the situation of the Arras Cemetery, which sits here on the top of Sancton Dale, which you can see here. And at the mouth of this ladder settlement, as they're known, because Derek Riley, I think, coined this phrase, because these strips of enclosures resemble a ladder. And we've got a group of burials right at the far end of this section here. But note the high position described by the excavators in 1815 to 17 as a kind of tableland, to quote. Notice as well on Market Wheaton Wold, which is the hilltop to the west, the group of must have been quite imposing cemetery of round barrows, which overlook the Vale of York. Quite a staggering viewpoint. One can see York Minster and the Pennines on a clear day from there. The Arras Cemetery itself, this is the best view ever in recent times, which appeared in 2007. And one can see round barrows here as well, and this whole cluster of square barrows. According to John Dent's typology, the ones without central graves are probably the earliest, because bodies were then buried on the surface of the ground and have subsequently ploughed. Now, on the bicentenary of those discoveries, I thought we ought to do something, and we were able to raise funding and get help in kind to do a research project to try and map the full extent of the Arras Cemetery. And here we can see a drone shot just after the field has been ploughed, and you can see the whitish dots here of the square barrows. These dots here are chalk pits, but the whole field is completely flat. So it's only by crop marks really you can see things. There are odd striations in the field, which we're pretty sure are caused by some kind of glacial activity. As part of our project, thanks to various sponsors who you can see at the bottom right of the screen, we're able to get James Lyle and I think Ellie here to do a magnetometer survey, which you can see here. Great credit to James, who's been one of my co-directors and supervisors on work within this region since 2012. So this project produced pretty good results, but the geology masks the archaeology and his detail, though, of some of those square barrows. So I was able then to map the whole extent of the Arras cemetery, which you can see here, by combining all those results together here at the head of Sancton Dale. Here's the view, James on his sword for himself with a machine here, doing a magnetometer survey of the area. To the north, we've got a fault line, I think, certainly a valley running through the wolds from east to west. But looking south, you can see the River Humber in the background here. This is a natural routeway then between the uplands of the Yorkshire Wolds and the lowlands to which we will now go. So this is again the area which I chose for my own PhD thesis, and which myself and Professor Martin Millett worked for so long at Shipton Thorpe, Hayton and round at Hull and Spalding Moor. The view here down without the wind turbines that now cover a lot of this area, down from Arras to Sancton and down to those lowlands. And here the Humber lowlands themselves. And note these field boundaries around here match the shaded area here. And research which is done in the 1980s really as part of my master's at Durham and later carried on by Dr. Jim Innes and the student here, Anna Coles, and also various other projects, such as the Humber Wetlands Project. Coring across here and a study of the soil map showed that at 2 times this was a tidal inlet. In the Mesolithic and Neolithic period, there was a tidal inlet in the dark blue, and in the Iron Age, the light blue. And what's quite scary about this, certainly if you're living in the lowland regions, was we have marine deposits at 0.5 to 0.7 OD. So in the Iron Age then, open water for the most part right up to here. And the Arras Cemetery, that's Market Wheaton, the Arras Cemetery is just here, slightly off the picture. So you can see here the evidence. Oh dear, no safety helmet. Who would left us in the vehicle. And here's Jim Innes coring. And you can see this very, very sudden ingress, which caused this tidal marine transgression or incursion, laying down this thick deposit of clays with a Bronze Age forest underneath, and then this late Mesolithic, Neolithic tidal inlet. Recreated, sadly, for those living in this region in the tidal surge of 2013 and mapped up here in this terrain model. The lowlands, however, provided opportunities, and one of the main products of the raw materials was bog iron ore, which you can see in this large heap, excavated at Moores Farm, Welland Bridge in 1985. Radiocarbon dates, which match more or less with the Arras culture. The third largest prehistoric slag heap in the UK. It was number 1 until it was defeated by Crickwell West at Peter Crewe, and also another by one in the Thames Valley. But the quantities of material are fascinating. The 47 hectares of woodland probably wasn't deforestation, but careful management. Iron is obviously needed for chariots. And thanks really to Peter Crewe and his experimental work, which you can see his experimental furnace here, we're able to draw some calculations. 1 kilo of fully refined bar iron, it is estimated took between 8 and 25 days, depending on various parameters, on ore type and technology. It's a colossal investment then. And thanks to more experimental archaeology by Don Barker for the Yorkshire Museum, they weighed one of the wheels at 12 kilos, and we've got 36 kilos of iron needed for all the chariot fittings, which equates to 20 days labor at the lowest estimate. That's all the elements of labor to produce the iron, just to make the iron alone in the chariot. So it tells us an enormous amount about status. And we can map those sites. And the red diamonds there show the ironworking sites. As far as we're aware of the Iron Age, those we were able to get radiocarbon dates from, places where ironworking has been found within settlements. But notice as well those in the Holt Valley at Thean and Arran. And notice as well one at Helmswell, although we await dating because it is possible that there's Anglo-Saxon iron smelting there as well. And we've got the distribution of the chariots. Notice the very different landscape of the Iron Age at that period. And of course, within that landscape, the Haslam logboat, reconstructed here in Mark Faulkner's wonderful reconstruction, 12.5 meters, felling date 322-277, 800 years old. So again, in the period of the Arras culture burials. And one destroyed boat at South Car Farm, close to the site at North Cave. What of settlement? Obviously, these people buried had to live somewhere. And this distribution map shows again the 2013 distribution of settlements. Notice this line in Holderness, which is really found only by stripping the topsoil for its gas pipeline. Lowland settlements with deep ditches, often in wet areas, and the ladder settlements, here's Arras once again. And really in the in-between zone in this region, a settlement on an excavation that Martin and myself carried out with a great team at Hayton, and the reconstruction. We move on to a new site, and I can actually see this hilltop from the front of the house in which I'm talking from at the moment at Nunburnham. And it has a spectacular view over the Vale of York, and one can see the power stations in the background. But unsuspected, although Kathy Sturt's plotted some features from Derek Riley, such as the Square Barrow Cemetery, what wasn't realised was this magnificent site here, this huge oval enclosure, almost 200 metres across and 70 metres wide, with a great funnel leading into this valley. And we would argue from the excavation that this is some kind of central meeting place. We found lots of evidence for pottery, animal bone, and Claire Rainsford, who's looked at the bone materials, pretty sure that some of this may be due to some kind of feasting activity. We excavated the site thanks to an HLF bid, but also one of the discoveries found in a pit here is this votive axe. And here's the site again from James's fantastic geophysical survey. This pit here is a modern chalk pit. But we could split the area into two, a more profane domestic zone and a sacred ritual burial area, because in here we've probably got the Neolithic mortar enclosure, we've got a hengiform monument, and also we have over in this side a group of Middle Iron Age round barrows, one of which had a piece of collared urn in it. It's a close-up of the barrows, and within it, two ones we excavated, very closely related in many ways to those at Pockington, which we'll be hearing about very shortly. Well, here is the Nunburnham Wold barrow with lots of barrows up here. Most of these barrows all over the world seem to hug the sides of valleys, almost as though they're claiming some form of ownership to access points through the walls. The ones at Pockington, however, are associated with a stream. Again, as with Dunburnham, not the first activity around that stream, because here, thanks to Tony Hunt's wonderful drone photography of 2018, in that very, very wonderful dry summer, we have a hengiform monument, square barrows, and this magnificent droveway feature with square barrows associated with it and an enclosure. And also you can see a roundhouse from unenclosed settlement, a bit like the one at Wetwang. And again here, the bend of the droveway respects another feature, which could be a large round barrow or perhaps some kind of small hengiform monument. So when all these crop marks are placed together, we can see that Pockington is at the center of some amazing archaeology. Great droveways lead right across the landscape. Here's the Bernby Lane site that Paul will be talking about first. And here, the crop marks around the mile. The red ones are the new features that you saw, which adds to Sturtz's mapping. So a landscape full of archaeology, and one could argue potentially a ritual landscape for some considerable time, which is possibly why those barrows in the Iron Age are placed where they are. And of course, in the Anglo-Saxon period, as you will find out, we've got the site at the mile. So I finished my bit by a good lead-in to Paula's lecture, which is to show Pockington from the air. The reason we got Tony out to do his fantastic drone work in the first place was because of one of the flights I took. And here you can see this droveway running right the way through this triple feature, redug several times. And the site that Paul will be talking about later at the mile is over here. So I will now stop sharing and pass over to Paula.
Okay, I'm not sure, sorry, how that's looking on screen for everyone. I'll just attempt to have that. I think we're there now. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, Paula.
This section of the talk will concentrate on the discovery of 3 chariots, 2 at Pockington and the other at Melton. The sites have been discovered in advance of excavation before development and were totally unexpected. With such a huge volume of excavated material, many specialists have been involved. As Peter's already pointed out, he's been involved with Malcolm Lilly, but a whole host of other people that we're indebted to in terms of their reports. Malin Holst of York Osteology, Jane Richardson from YAS, Derek Hamilton, Sophie Adams, and if I forget anyone else, Dominic Poulsland did the 3D modelling. I'm very sorry. The excavations were the first in a generation to have a look at an Iron Age cemetery associated with the Arras culture. At the Bernby Lane Cemetery, we had 172 burials, 2 Bronze Age, 130 Iron Age and 40 Anglian. The site wasn't initially known to be there. Geophysics hadn't recognised the cemetery, although 1 square barrow had been revealed. And it turns out that this seems to be an issue in terms of the soils and the geology with geophysics, because it was the same thing that happened at the mile at Pockington. The site must be included now with the largest cemeteries based on the wolds of Arras, Danesgraves, Gartenslack and Rudston. and the development of the cemetery was based on the actual barrow size and the stratigraphic relationships between them. The barrows were placed within John Dent's groups, and within the dominant group 2, the middle phase of development, barrow 85 was revealed. Barrow 85, situated on the eastern side of Bernby Lane, underneath the verge, was very badly truncated by both the road ditch and a later ditch. The interior of the barrow measured at least 7.1 and from east to west, and 7.1 from north to south. The ditch was 1 metre wide and 0.25 metres, with a rich gravelly primary fill. As you can see how badly truncated, but it still revealed the ritual of the burial. We have one tyre here, the burial placed here on the pole, with 2 ponies looping round, the feet looping round the pole. The burial, although really badly truncated, we've been able to discover was a male in middle adult, so 25 plus. He was placed on the pole. He was facing north, so in a position north, facing east. Just see it's left there. Enough bone was present to be able to age. Sorry, I'm just going to, thank you. And the individual had calcified pleura, which were associated with pulmonary diseases, including tuberculosis. An amorphous deposit of dark silt suggested that the body may have been wrapped or placed over some form of bedding. The body was framed by the hind legs of the 2 ponies. The principal remains of the chariot consisted of a circular iron tyre, 2 lower nave hoops, which lay horizontally, and the soil stain of the pole, which measured 2.3 metres along the axis of the grave. Both ponies lay with their heads to the north, facing each other, the western pony on its left side and the eastern on its right. It's clear from the range of bones that the animals were entire when placed in the grave. The better preserved eastern pony was definitely male. But it's not possible to sex the western one, as the crucial part of the mandible was missing. The posed nature of the ponies, with legs wrapped around the pole, highlights the significance of the burial ritual. A radius and metacarpal indicated the eastern pony measured around 13 hands or 1.2 metres at the withers, and both were of a mature age. They were draft animals used to pulling a cart. The iron tyre was approximately 0.83 metres in diameter, and the enclosed soil marks represented the wooden wheel rim, 12 spokes, and the nave. And it's a credit to the excavator to see the level of detail that he'd discovered. The wheel was made from ash. The interior surface of the lower nave hoops and the mineralised remains of leather skin were visible with hair fibres. Leather was only present on the interior of the hoop, acting as a washer to ensure a tight fit, with the nave in effect acting as a shock absorber. Melton. Located within 1 kilometre of the Humber foreshore and in an area that was demonstrated by Peter's photos, this site revealed further evidence for unexpected Iron Age burials. 10 square barrows with dimensions of between 8 and 10 metres internally, and all barrows with the exception of one having deep ditches, some up to 0.7 metres deep. A total of 43 inhumations, including 9 neonates, were excavated. And on this site, the bone preservation was particularly good. Most of the burials were on a north-south alignment, with the head facing east. The osteology report has provided evidence for some interesting pathology, including scurvy and rickets, both rare in Iron Age populations. In contrast to Pockington, this site has an abundance of animal bone deposits in graves and pits. The animal bones and shells indicate a diet dominated by the meat from domestic animals. it's likely that the main domestic animals, cattle, sheep and pigs, were raised locally based on the presence of the neonatal bones and the older breeding stock. Sheep and pigs were targeted for prime meat, while older sheep were probably used for their fleeces and milk, and mature cattle were used for milk and traction. The assemblage is made up of unusual and atypical deposits, including complete skulls, partial skeletons, and complete carcasses. They did not reflect everyday animal husbandry and dietary choices. Fertility rites, with the inclusion of juvenile and neonatal remains, feasting demonstrated with butchered bones, sacrifice with cremated bone, and burial rites where animals were specifically selected as grave goods. Barrow 403 contained a mature male aligned east-west facing south, and 3 goats and 3 pigs were placed within the grave. Butchery marks to the necks of the goats suggest they had been beheaded, but the heads still made it into the grave. The young age of the animals indicates clear selection and the sacrifice of valuable resources, in particular the loss of prime meat. The presence of 7 neonates, a poleaxe cattle cranium, and a single butchered horse pelvis, with displaying the marks of dismemberment, were located in the Barrow ditch, which adds to the significance of the barrow. Back to Chariots. Barrow 759 had insubstantial ditches and measured 8.5 north to south and 8.5 metres east to west. The large central grave measured 3.65 metres from north to south and 2.2 metres from east to west, and had vertical sides and a depth of 0.43. Unlike Pockington, this grave had not been disturbed. The dismantled chariot had been placed in the grave with all key structural elements seen as soil stains. The grave fill contained a small concentration of burnt oak, possibly the backfilled residue from feasting. The central grave contained the crouched burial of a middle-aged adult, aligned north to south, laid on the left side with the head to the north facing east, with the lower back and pelvis positioned on the pole and the feet near the axle. Placed on the hip was a pig skull and shoulder in the East Yorkshire tradition. The man was between 1.63 and 1.69 metres in height. The structural remains of a dismantled chariot consisted of the chariot box, the axle, and the pole, all being represented by soil stains. A roughly rectangular area of dark silt, 0.5 metres wide and at least 0.6 metres long, implied the presence of the chariot box. The axle was indicated by a 1.5 metre long and 0.5 metre wide linear band of dark silt running parallel to the southern edge of the grave. The remains of the pole were in 2 parts. One part of the pole lay to the west of the burial and immediately north of the axle and measured 0.95 metres in length and 0.1 metre wide. The second part of the pole was similar in size, but was offset 0.3 metres to the east and extended northwards as far as the remains of the yoke. The yoke was aligned east to west, although not quite perpendicular to the pole, and was 0.7 metres in length and 0.18 in width. 4 copper alloy penannular turret rings were spaced roughly equally along the surface of the yoke. 3 of the turret rings had iron rivets at the terminals. 1 turret ring had iron core around which the copper alloy tube was wrapped, and 1 was decorated with beading. An intriguing composite object found on the surface of the yoke between 2 turret rings had a copper alloy upper plate riveted to the iron lower plate. The upper plate was oval, convex in section, one end tapering and rising upwards, pierced by a rectangular slot. The iron lower plate was subrectangular, concave in section, and also rose upwards at one end. Mineralized wood, oak, and leather were present between the 2 plates and hint at the functional nature of the object. Although still, nobody's really determined what this object is, so any theories, please get in touch. 2 iron bridle bits of snaffle type were found overlying the western wheel, consisting of 2 annular iron rein rings, or cheek pieces, joined to a snaffle consisting of a 2 figure-of-8 shaped iron loops, linked together by a small iron ring, the other ends being looped over the corresponding rein ring. The 2 bits are functional rather than ornate, and were free running in relation to the rein rings similar to the Garton slack ones. The 2 wheels of the chariot were laid flat in the northern part of the grave, adjacent to the yoke. The precise burial sequence was that the western wheel was laid flat, the pole placed to slightly overlap, and then the eastern wheel overlapped the pole. The wheels themselves consisted of the vanished organic elements of the felloes, wheel rims, spokes and naves, and had 12 spokes, measuring 0.27 metres in length. The iron tyres differed slightly in size, the west wheel having a diameter of 0.81 metres and the east wheel 0.805 metres. Both were 4 mil thick. Back to the mile. Pockington. This site we thought we were excavating was located on the flat gravel expanse on the west side of Pockington, and it was 2 kilometres north of the Bernby Lane site at an elevation of 40 metres AOD. An exceptional site in its own right, an enclosed settlement dating to the Middle Anglian period, with 20 sunken floor buildings, was surpassed by the Iron Age discoveries. The topsoil strip revealed the unexpected but recognisable form of a large barrow. The ditches of the square barrow enclosed an area of approximately 6.5 metres across. The grave was placed centrally within the enclosed area and measured 4.4 from north to south and 2.4 from west to east. Its large size hinting at the potential for what it may contain. The palpable excitement of the team at the latest discovery detracted attention from the Anglian settlement, and to this day, all attention is directed to the Iron Age finds. The first indicator of a potential third chariot was the discovery of a disturbed turret in the upper fill of the grave. The second was the emergence of a vertebrae, upright vertebrae, another hint of what the significance of the burial may be. The third sign was the emergence of rims on either side. The fourth sign was the emergence of the shape of the structure itself. And the fifth element was the actual detail of the burial. The grave turned out to be over 1 metre deep, with vertical sides and a flat base, and predominantly filled with an amorphous dump of mixed sandy gravel. The burial was placed within the chariot box. This was a mature adult male, 46 years plus, who was arranged in a crouched position on the right side with the head to the north, and interestingly this time, his head facing west. His legs were tightly drawn up against the abdomen and chest and leaving the feet near the pelvis. The hands were placed together in front of the face. The skeleton dipped downwards to the southeast, probably due to the collapse of the box floor. He was 1 metre 73 tall and significantly taller than the mean height of 168 for an Iron Age males nationally. The skeleton presented evidence of trauma, with a fractured rib that was healing at the time of death and muscle damage to the left thigh. His advancing age was illustrated by osteoporosis and the long-standing poor oral health, resulting in some tooth loss, diseased gums, and dental abscesses. The deposit which overlay and surrounded the inhumation contained a large quantity of bone from at least 5 subadult pigs. Only bones from the head or forelimb, both left and right, were present, with some paired examples suggesting articulation. One of the groups of ribs had an iron object firmly attached to it. Thought to be a possible meat hook or spit, this object consisted of an iron crossbar with a bar extending outwards at right angles at each end. Each of these bars continued to and under a series of 3 animal ribs, which were held together in a stony matrix. There were 2 separate iron objects, one a small flat bar and the other an L-shaped object. The remains of the chariot were largely complete, apart from the yoke, and appeared to be still assembled, with the wheels upright and attached via the naves to the axle, which was approximately 2 metres in length. It was clear that the axle was a substantial piece of timber, 0.14 metres thick. Wood remains on the interior of the nave bands indicate that it was made from ash. A dark soil stain located the position of the chariot box, which was relatively narrow and shallowed with a tapered front end. It had a length of 1.4 metres internally, with the width of 0.65 at the east, dropping to 0.25 at the north, the front end. The chariot box rested on top of the axle, but there were no indications of how the superstructure and the axle were joined together. The remains of the pole consisted of an intermittent soil stain that dipped down from the front of the chariot towards the rear and was at least 1.35 metres long. Nave hubs appeared to be roughly flush with the axle, and judging by the position of the nave hoops, were 30 centimetres long. Of the 4 copper alloy nave hoops, 3 were similar in form, with medial raised bands that no doubt provided both decoration and strengthening. The other nave hoop was much narrower and a plain ring. The linchpins were tapering iron bars linked to iron rings at their top ends with rounded knobs at the other end. Using the distance between the outside of the upright iron tyres as a guide, the chariot had a gauge of circa 1.58 metres. The iron tyres were 0.9 metres in diameter, 4 mil wide and 1.5 mil thick. Evidence for 6 spokes were indicated in one wheel by organic soil stains. Their positions showing that the wheels originally had 12 spokes. The wooden rim was shown by a 0.3 mil wide band of organic staining on the inside of the iron tyre. This fantastic model undertaken by Dominic Powsland reveals the extent of the chariot. And the remarkable aspect of the burial of the 2 ponies was that they were in upright position and not simply standing. They were posed as if they were still pulling the chariot. You can see this by the position here. Unfortunately, the heads of neither pony survived, making it impossible to sex the animals and infer if any selection was involved. Their bones were all fused, showing that they were not juvenile animals, and the mineralisation of some soft tissue of the western pony suggested that this was a mature specimen. Interestingly, the eastern pony had a healing wound on the left scapula, showing that it had survived a significant injury. During the excavation and recording of the ponies, there was speculation that they'd been posed in their standing position by packing soil around them as the grave was backfilled. However, when the lifting of the skeletons was underway, soil stains were revealed, which may well have represented structures that held them upright. 3 rectangular stains beneath and between the ponies represented the structures that could have been used to support the ponies, perhaps in conjunction with straps and dumps of soil. The ponies stood to just over 13 hands. Once the skeleton had been lifted, more details of the chariot body was revealed, standing to a height of 0.25 metres. There were indications of another structural element on the exterior, rearward half of the main superstructure, evidenced by a deposit of loose yellowish brown silty sand, conjecturally representing a more permeable material such as wickerwork. On the eastern side, the elements of the superstructure rested on top of the axle, whereas on the western side, the superstructure appeared only partly to overlap the axle. Perhaps it had collapsed within the grave at this point. There are no indications of how the superstructure and the axle were joined, but this could have been solved by either carpentry pegs and tenons or by using hide lashings. There was no clear sign of the base of the box, but it appears to have collapsed, causing the downward tipping of the inhumation in the shield. It's likely that the difficulty of consolidating the grey backfill beneath the chariot box caused the collapse of the base of the box. The fact that the floor did not leave any other clear traces implies it was not substantial and was possibly composed of hide, either as a single sheet or interlaced network of strips. The radiocarbon date indicates a date of 360 to 170 BC. This is completely consistent with the radiocarbon results for other chariot burials on the East Yorkshire wolds, Wetwang Slack, Wetwang Village, Garton Slack, Garton Station and Kirkburn. The burial was placed directly on top of a wood copper alloy composite shield, which was laid face down, and caused great excitement while excavating. And this was really the last view that the excavators had of it, because it was block lifted by the conservators. And about 14 months later, this was the result. The shield had a central spine riveted with an ovid boss, which was overlapped 2 crescent-shaped oval plates with exquisite repoussé decoration. A scalloped frieze consisting of individual cutouts of copper alloy strip surrounded the central plates. The bottom and left sides were indicated by a series of copper alloy binding strips, although binding strips were absent along the top and right sides, but the position of the in situ strips indicated that the complete shield was rectangular. Minerally preserved organic material on the surface suggests it was covered with leather. The extent of the metal fittings revealed the shield board was rectangular in shape, measuring 0.7 metres long and by 0.5 metres wide. The soil marks clearly show that the wood grain ran across the long axis of the shield rather than along the length, meaning that an overhead sword blow would not cut into the end grain of the wood, and thus the shield board would be more resistant to splitting. This does not suggest the shield was intended for use in battle. It does, however, suggest that whoever made the shield had enough familiarity with the needs of combat and shield construction to create a functional artifact. There is no surviving evidence for the shape or dimensions of the hand grip. Of further note is the damage to the shield by an insertion, possibly by a sword or dagger, prior to burial. Fantastic drawing of this shield, detailed, giving all its detail by Steve Allen, reveals the design. And Jennifer Foster has noticed and brought to our attention that the symmetrical side of the shield contains 2 hidden faces in the design. 2 human faces on the corners with an animal in between, which looks like a dog, but could be a boar, as dogs are extremely rare in Iron Age. But since this is particularly rare, I think we'll go with dog. A pair of near identical rod-type linchpins revealed more zoomorphic detail. The shank tapers downwards to an elongated rounded knob with a circular foot at the base, echoing the form of a horse's fetlock and hoof. The heads of each linchpin were decorated with a roundel of enamel, which appears pinkish white in colour. Both linchpins were accompanied by iron annular attachment rings with circular cross sections. And you can see the work from conservation. This is what it looked like in the ground and after conservation. After the skeleton was lifted, a bow brooch was found pinned side up, suggesting that it was displayed on the right side of the body. The brooch was composed of a copper alloy body, an iron pin, and a glass roundel on the dorsal side. The decoration and design suggest a dragonfly complete with tail. And the final view of the barrow after excavation, and with thanks to all the contributors, especially Mark Stevens and the team at MAP, York Osteology, Jane Richardson, York Archaeological Trust Conservation Team, Mel Giles, Matt Chittock, Derek Hamilton, Sophie Adams, Peter Halkin and Malcolm Lilly, and Dominic Pousland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. And of course, Peter. Am I back on yet?
Yeah.
Yes, right. Thank you. They're getting comments through. Initially, thanks from Rachel Pope. That was amazing. Katie Whitaker, such an interesting lecture. I hope we'll get some questions shortly. Yes. still thanks at the moment. From Andrew Sefton, when is the book due out?
It goes to the editor at the end of February. Fingers crossed, we're still awaiting 2 specialist reports.
Yeah.
So,
And an introductory chapter.
yes. Pete, I didn't want to say that.
Yeah.
All
It's nearly
other
there.
quick questions, actually. Do you want me to start things off?
Yes.
Okay, that was really excellent. That was a fantastic description, actually, of the find and of the landscape around it. I've just got a few which I can reel off for you. Going back to the scrap heap, you said there was one in the Thames Valley. Where is that one? Number 2.
I can't remember exactly. It's one that Steve Preston sent me about. There's quite there was a big project. Oh goodness me, must have been nearly 10 years ago, and suddenly quite a lot of ironworking sites were found, and it is published. I'm sure I can find a reference somewhere.
Okay, thanks.
But I think it's Thames Valley Archaeology.
Oh, TVAS. Okay,
Yeah.
The second thing is that very big enclosure, 200 meters. I didn't catch where it was.
It's at Nunburnham Wold.
Right.
Nunburnham being a small village between Market Weekton and Pockington.
Right, and you said it was sort of on the edge of looking down to valley.
Yeah.
Those shaped enclosures at different periods can be like sort of funnels for where you get stock management.
Yeah, I could have gone on to say that I was conscious of time, of course, that our paleo-environmental work done by John Chariot of PRS showed that the walls at that time were largely cleared.
Yeah.
There was some woodland in the valleys, and I think quite a good interpretation now is that the grasslands of the walls were where the stock was, horses, cattle, and that at certain times of the year, stock was driven into that great funnel. There's another rather spectacular hill fort site that we've been excavating more recently, which overlooks the other end of that valley, a great ring fort like Thwing. And it seems to me that there's a synergy between the two, and that stock is driven down the valley into there, slaughtered, marketed, people met there, and opposite the times, Beltane or Salmaine or whatever, if one believes that in that kind of thing. Because what we didn't find, and James Lye, I don't know whether James has been listening, did not find any evidence of roundhouses. There is perhaps one. So we think we're looking at temporary activity.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because of course pigs are traditionally sort of woodland animals, aren't they?
Yeah, the closest parallel that Manuel Fernandez Gott has pointed out very similar sites on the continent as far as into Germany as well, which served a kind of similar function as major meeting places.
Yeah. And finally, I was going to ask you about the environment, because of course open grassland would be perfect chariot territory, wouldn't it? Exactly,
yeah. And that brings in something else into the picture, those linear earthworks, which some are clearly positioned to prevent access to other areas, and also to lead down to watercourses, which aren't that important for sheep, but obviously lactating cattle and horses need regular water supplies, which should be closely guarded.
Okay, thanks very much. I won't hog the discussion anymore. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you. Now, one or two more questions on the screen. Diana Briscoe would like to know, where can she find out more about the Anglo-Saxon finds, please?
That work is ongoing at the minute, the post-excavation assessment. So that will be in the future.
And probably also in the future, we're asked, will the finds be displayed and where?
That's a matter of some debate. As a trustee of the Pockington and District Heritage Trust, we are hoping to, we've got quite a long way towards having a museum actually in Bernby Hall gardens at Pockington in accommodation that was still belonged to the East Riding of Yorkshire Council. So things are in hand, and it would be rather nice if those finds could come back to this region. But as I said, that's going to be a matter of some debate, I think.
Right. Any other Pockington sites where digging work has yet to start by those involved in this project? Hello?
Right. Paula, one for you, I think.
Well, I'm just thinking there, Peter, we would only know about forthcoming sites. I think there's possibly one, but down near the Beck, but not close to the Bernby Lane or the Mile sites. But Pockington is rapidly expanding at the moment. So it's just as and when sites come forward. We completed work on a site at Yapham Road, but that hasn't started the post-excavation assessment yet.
Right. There's some more questions I can see. Hello, Fraser. I thought he'd be listening. Questions about the shape of the chariots. Yes, there do seem to be some varieties, and both seem to be quite different from some of the reconstructions that we're seeing based on the coin evidence. There's a question here really for Paula. Did you see any evidence of repairs? I suppose that would be quite difficult.
Yes, and there's evidence from the Melton Chariot that there's been repairs, and definitely the snaffle bits are well worn, and one of them wasn't complete. And so there's a possibility that it's been repaired by organic material that has disappeared within the context of the grave. So that's speculation, but definitely we have seen repairs.
Yeah, we've got a couple of other questions. I'm looking through these. There's one about the accuracy of referring to these burials as chariots. Well, yes, we've got a guy buried with a shield. We've got both of the two of the Wet Wang 1984 ones buried with swords, one with the shield. One is one of those which Paul didn't have time really to mention. There are the spectacular burials which seem to have had spears possibly deliberately thrown into the grave during burial. And although unfashionable it may have seen at one stage, I'm pretty sure that some of these were used in warfare. I mean, Caesar and Tacitus were not making it up, I don't think, when they're referred even as late as the Claudian invasion. People using chariots regarded as somewhat old-fashioned in Gaul by that time, but yeah, they're multi-purpose vehicles as well. I'm pretty sure that people rode around the landscape on them as well. And somebody's also asked about dates, and of course Fraser's chariot, or Headland archaeologist's chariot in Edinburgh is in fact the earliest. And some of the fittings are dissimilar to ones that we've got here in Eastern Yorkshire.
Another interesting question. Has any DNA genetic work been done on the human or animal remains from these burials?
Yes, I think so, but I think those results are still awaited.
Right. And could the unknown oblong piece of iron and wood be some sort of tool similar to a pulley?
Are they referring to the axle?
Yeah, the object with an iron bottom plate and a bronze top plate, and presumably
yes, the
clamping a piece
of
of
object,
wood.
yes. This needs to be tested. Yes, that is the possibility. And the interesting thing about the Melton Chariot is that it has the 4 turrets. It doesn't have a 5th. So there's speculation about that object. Yes.
It looks as though it's meant to be an anchor point on a wooden artifact.
Yes.
the iron and the copper and the bronze clasping the wood and giving one a strong point to fix to.
Yes. I'd like to think that it was definitely attached to the chariot, that it was what its function was, and the reason why it was there, open to suggestions.
Right.
You've got a couple of questions. There's a question here about the comparison of the Pembroke one. They're really quite different. The grave goods, I'm not sure of the dating. I can't quite remember from the antiquaries lecture that I was able to go to, but I think considerably later. Another question about several women buried in chariot graves. The interesting thing about the Arras culture is that perhaps one could argue parity in sexes. We've got the Wetwang woman dug in 1984 by John Dent. If one compares the grave goods, they are superior. And of course, you've got the very enigmatic object which John Dent christened the bean can, which thanks to Sonia O'Connor's conservation work, can now show not to be just a hollow tin, but could have been opened as a canister, which has superb decoration on. Her artifacts are embellished with coral as well. And then we have a very tall and distinguished looking woman from 2001, Wetwang village, who's buried with a nice festoon of very tiny glass beads hanging from mirrors, which mirrors do seem to feature, which were misnamed by the excavators at Arras as iron skillets, which is quite interesting, because I don't think they really conceived of the fact then that such items could have been polished to provide a mirror. So I hope we're answering your questions. We've got another one about who were warriors fighting at this time? Between themselves, warring tribes, if you like, I suppose. And right, okay. Yeah.
Sorry, Peter.
Yeah. Sorry, Paul.
I was going to say that perhaps we could conclude the discussion with one question from me, and that is in the Arras culture, are there any distinctive features about the roundhouses that are seen as, or could be seen as, related to the Arras culture and differentiating the roundhouse from roundhouses from the norm which occurs all over Britain and beyond?
No, and that is a very, very interesting point, which is spotted by Hodson many years ago, that certain elements do seem to continue from the Bronze Age. The roundhouses are very much the same as anywhere else, really. And then there was this huge debate about the difference in the continental ones, in the continent where houses are more rectangular. But then we found the upright chariot burials were supposed to be continental, but we found, of course, upright burials over here, intact chariots. There are roundhouses found in northern France as well. So that distinction perhaps isn't quite as clear as was once thought. And I'm pretty sure that whether the people ventured across or not, there must have been considerably close links across the North Sea and Channel.